So good evening, everybody. Thank you for being here. Thank you for being on time, and welcome to the first of 6 sessions. These are going to be monthly of the Let's Talk SDP series. This is presented in collaboration with North Bay Regional Center and their local volunteer advisory committee for self-determination. The Education Spectrum is a grant recipient of funding, and through that grant, we are providing this training series for participants and families to learn more about self-determination. Before we get started, I'd like us to go ahead and introduce ourselves, and we wouldn't be here if it wasn't for Kathy, so I'm going to put her on the spot and have her go first.
Okay, I hope I'm still not muted.
You're not. You're doing awesome.
But my name is Kathy Gott, and I have had a social skills program serving regional center clients, been a vendor for 26 years. And more recently, though, I've taken an interest in self-determination, thought I'd help other families, and turned out that we helped our son transition, our 29-year-old son transition just over a year ago. It's been life-changing for Danny, to say the least. I am super open, transparent, and have permission to share Danny's person-centered plan, documents, whatever. Feel free to reach out. I'm an open book and just want to help other people through my own experiences. And it is my pleasure to introduce Naomi Hagel. Naomi is an independent facilitator, but not only is she in private practice helping lots of families and a fierce advocate, but Naomi used to run one of the self-determination programs. She was a manager at one of the regional centers. So she has a really good understanding from the inside out, and is just super passionate and compassionate and a pleasure to work with. I'll let you introduce Abraham, but I'm going to stop talking and I'm just here to help facilitate. So thanks for being here.
Thank you, Kathy. I hope I can live up to that introduction. As Kathy said, I am an independent facilitator. I'm also a credentialed person-centered thinking trainer through the Learning Community for Person-Centered Practices. I love self-determination. I also loved the 4.5 years that I spent in as a manager at a regional center. I do person-centered plans, independent facilitation, advocacy, support in general. But I couldn't do a lot of what I do at this point without Abraham, who is working with me and who I am going to have introduce himself, because I am not going to do him justice. No pressure, Abraham.
Good evening, everybody. So a little bit of background on me. I'm a former special ed teacher. I also worked at a regional center in a forensic unit, supporting people and mainly writing diversion plans to get them out and place them in the community. And now I'm with Naomi. I should also add that I'm also in the process of completing getting board certified in behavior analysis. And now I'm with Naomi, supporting her with independent facilitation for self-determination. I should also add that the advocacy world is really my passion. I'm also a court-appointed special advocate, and so that's really where the passion comes from. So it's something that I figured I'd do for free. So why not get paid for it? Why not get paid for it through independent facilitation? So I'm working for Naomi and doing what I love, and look forward to working with you all.
And Abraham forgot to also share that he is critical to the success of everything that we do, because he is fluent in Spanish, which I am not. So thank you, Abraham. And we're all here tonight kind of working together to put on this presentation. Kathy, do you mind sharing your screen? So, okay. a moment here. Okay, so Education Spectrum we are actually working with the North Bay Regional Center, and we have been for about 8 months at this point, and we have several more months to go because we are actually working with North Bay to streamline and assist with the self-determination process, which I am well aware can feel overwhelming or mysterious. I am going to go ahead and just mute everybody if they're not talking. Thank you. So we are actually working with North Bay Regional Center team as a whole. And our goal is to help streamline and assist with the self-determination process, which I know can feel overwhelming and it's mysterious. And that's on top of the regional center being a challenge in and of itself at times. So our team actually has been and is going to continue working with North Bay's self-determination team, which really I just have to give them a shout out. They have done some incredible work, including especially recently, and made some real progress. But we're also working with the North Bay Regional Center staff as a whole. We're working with traditional services vendors, and we're also working with participants and families. And we have an overall goal to increase everyone's knowledge about self-determination, tackle issues that arise, and overall, we want to make it easier for everybody to access person-centered services. As Kathy mentioned, until recently, I was a manager at a regional center in the LA area working on self-determination. And because of that, I have a very unique viewpoint because I both have been where the NBRC staff are, felt what they feel, and heard all their worries and concerns. But I also have a real passion for person-centered thinking and reducing service disparities. And this, I like to think, allows me to connect with potential participants on families on a human and service-based level. I also know that the very real concerns that regional centers and participants and families share about the amount of work that can be, but does not have to be, involved in the self-determination program. I have heard that it's scary, and I've heard that they don't understand it and you don't understand it, or even regional center or generic services in general. And honestly, before I worked for a regional center, I probably would have thought that a generic service was a kind of soda that wasn't Coke or Pepsi. So really, I get it. My goal tonight and ongoing is to bridge the gap between regional centers and participants and help everyone do less work and live more meaningful lives. There's no judgment here. We really hope that you share any questions, concerns, etc., in the chat or later on during our Q&A session that we're going to have at the end of tonight's training. Over a series of trainings that are going to be happening once per month for the next 6 months, we are going to be covering a lot of areas to help you in general. But I also want to encourage you to think outside of the box, even when I'm not talking to you. If you take nothing else from this session today, I hope that you will consider that self-determination might, it doesn't have to be, but it might be a good choice for you or your loved one, and that you have the right and hopefully will be given the ability to make informed choices about what service delivery system you want to utilize. In addition, if you have any case-specific questions or concerns that come up between trainings, please feel free to reach out to us. Abraham is going to put a link to free self-determination coaching that Education Spectrum is offering through the local advisory committee funds into the chat. And he will also put our email addresses into the chat. And we will also make sure to share tonight the NBRC self-determination team's email address as well. All of these emails are monitored by people who speak Spanish and English. I want to encourage you that speaking to NBRC specifically and us will also help us to make these trainings more useful for you, particularly if there are common questions, concerns, etc. In addition, we encourage you to attend the bi-monthly local advisory committee meetings. They are held via Zoom. And we're going to be putting a link into the chat of the self-determination page for North Bay Regional Center, which is where these meeting links typically are. And we encourage you to join these meetings in particular to be part of the self-determination community at North Bay and to share any questions, concerns, successes, or challenges that you might have with both the NBRC team and the education spectrum team, which will also give us the opportunity to brainstorm solutions together. Next slide, please, Kathy. So on the screen here, you can see an outline of how we are going to move through today's training. Each of our training sessions over the next several months will be similar in that for the first 45 minutes of the scheduled 90 minutes, we're going to do the training part where I give you information. The second 45 minutes is a more interactive question and answer session because no one needs to listen to me talk for 90 minutes. Tonight, the main focus of our training is to give you the basics of self-determination and hopefully to pique your interest to want to learn more, to be more involved, and to try self-determination yourself. This is a general overview of the program as a whole, and we will be going into more detail in future sessions. But to be clear, tonight's session does not replace the orientation session that is mandatory for all potential participants to take part in prior to moving forward with self-determination. If you have not already attended the orientation, or if you attended it a while back and forgot everything, that is totally okay. There are options for you. In the chat, we're going to share the information of the State Council for Developmental Disabilities online orientations, which North Bay Regional Center accepts, and we encourage you to learn more, to attend, and to move forward with the self-determination program as a whole. Next slide, please. So what is self-determination? Why are we here tonight? And kind of in an ethereal overall way, but not really in an ethereal overall way. Self-determination is a service delivery system, but it's not just that. It's a way of life, and it's possible to be self-determined even in the traditional service delivery system through regional centers. Self-determination is a choice, and I will be the first one to tell you it's not the right choice for everyone. Some of you may have heard that everyone has to do self-determination, but that's not true. Unfortunately, there is a lot of misinformation out there in general, so we're glad that you are here tonight to get accurate information. Self-determination is a voluntary service delivery system. It's not required, and it doesn't mean that traditional services or the regional center are going anywhere. It was in a soft rollout phase with a limited number of participants for 3 years until June 2021, but now it is open to most people served by regional centers. It's also not a new idea. Many other states have self-directed services or similar programs and have for many years. The self-determination pilot program in California itself have been in existence for so long that it would have been eligible to vote if it was a person. And some would even say that the ideals of self-determination are in the Lanterman Act itself, which is the law that all regional center services, traditional and self-determination are held to. This law was passed back in the 60s. Self-determination can even be considered to be part of the civil rights movement because disability rights are civil rights. Self-determination is a more person-centered way of service delivery. But what exactly is person-centered? Person-centered is the somewhat new way of thinking, which all Lanterman Act services, both in traditional and self-determination services, are supposed to be held to. Rather than the old school medical model and systems-focused way of thinking, which the regional centers and so many institutions have held to for generations, where they look at what is wrong with someone and they try to fix it. The thing is that people aren't broken and they don't need to be fixed. Person-centered thinking allows more creativity to find solutions that are outside of the norm and outside of the box that people, not just people with disabilities, but people as a whole have been forced to exist in. Now, I know that all sounds great, but everyone here is also doing approximately a billion things at once and in a global pandemic at that. I also know that you might hear about person-centered thinking and think about your very valid experiences with service coordinators with crazy high caseloads and all of the rules and policies and regulations and laws and everything you've always been told whenever you requested services. And you might wonder how it's possible that this is going to happen at all, never mind successfully. I do have a little secret for everyone here tonight. No one, not even the worst professional you've ever interacted with, got into this field because they like saying no to people or because they didn't want to help people. No regional center staff is waking up in the morning and wondering how they can make your life difficult today. Many of them come to work on many days and they have a sinking feeling where they know there must be something else out there, a service or a provider or something to provide to a client or many clients that they wish they could help, but they aren't in the place to provide the support to reach that person where they are at. Self-determination is how they and you make person-centered thinking actionable. And many aspects of self-determination and person-centered thinking are also components of community integration rules that all vendors are going to have to abide by within the next year. So no matter how much someone, whether that be a regional center staff, a participant, or a family member, might want to run and hide from changes, they're coming no matter what we do, so we might as well be prepared. As a whole, self-determination is governed by 5 principles, which are displayed on your screen. Freedom. In general, self-determination is about flexibility in service provision. Freedom specifically means the freedom for people with disabilities to exercise the same rights as all people, to make choices and decisions and be part of the community as anyone would, regardless of their disability. This is the freedom to decide who you want to spend time with, who you want to provide you paid and unpaid support, who you want to live with, and what you want to do during the day. This is the freedom to not necessarily go to the same day program as everyone else who lives in your home, or to not have to only receive services from providers that are vendored or contracted with the regional center. The next ideal is authority, which allows people and their circles of support to manage a budget to determine how best to meet their needs within certain parameters and guidelines. Ultimately, this is taxpayer money, federal money. There's always going to be rules and guidelines and laws. But maybe you don't need to use all of your respite this month, but you would like to save some up for the summer. With self-determination, you can do that. Maybe you want to pay your respite worker more and have less hours, but you know that with paying your provider more, you will have a more reliable long-term worker who might even have special training or qualifications that meet your specific needs, will provide consistent services, and avoid the disruptions of changing workers. In self-determination, you can do that. You are in charge of how much you pay your workers. There is also support in self-determination. Some people fear, and other people might hope, that the self-determination program means that traditional services and the regional center will be going away. But that's not true. Some people fear the self-determination program because they are afraid that they will be all alone, but that's not true either. There is still tons of support available in self-determination. And the program actually gives people a unique opportunity to expand their circles of support with person-centered planners, independent facilitators, financial management service agencies, and a community in general. By the way, it's totally okay if a lot of the last sentence I just said meant nothing to you, because those roles are things that we are going to cover throughout this training series over the next few months. Responsibility is a core part of self-determination. I will not lie to you today or any day, and I'm not going to pretend that self-determination doesn't mean work. It does require more effort and responsibility from the participant and family, but it also doesn't have to be nearly as much work as some people make it out to be. Responsibility also means for both the regional center and participants and families, among other things, responsibility for the wise use of public funds. As I mentioned, this is still taxpayer money, and it has to be treated as such. No matter what some people might hope, self-determination is not going to allow the regional center to buy you tickets to Disneyland, a car, a vacation, or anything like that. And the responsibility means that everyone, the regional center and the participants, has to do things right. Because again, this is a federal program. It's going to be audited, and we want to make sure that the flexibility and the program as a whole remain available. Responsibility also means taking responsibility for decisions in your own lives. The final but most important part of self-determination to me is confirmation. Confirmation means nothing about me without me. It is validation of the critical role of each of the participants and their selected circles of support in making decisions about their lives and designing and operating the services that they rely on. So before I move on, are there any questions? You guys can put them in the chat, raise your Zoom hand, probably unmute yourselves, whatever you would like. I'm just going to give people a minute because if left to my own devices, I can talk for hours. Okay, I'm not seeing any. So Kathy, can you go to the next slide? So who is eligible for self-determination? Who is able to receive these services? Prior to July of 2021, self-determination was only open for a select number of people via a lottery system. However, it is now open to most people served by regional centers. Now, I said most, not all. There are some guidelines. Specifically, an individual is eligible for self-determination if they are what is known as Lanterman Act eligible for ongoing services. This means that it's actually not only for individuals who are 3 years of age or older. If your loved one is an early start, meaning that they are under 3 years old, they may still be eligible for self-determination services if they've already been found eligible for ongoing services. This might happen if they were born with Down syndrome or cerebral palsy, for example. People who are eligible for self-determination also have to live in the community. The community is a really broad definition, though. It can mean living with family, living independently, like in supported living, or even living in a community care facility, which is like a group home, a family home agency, which is like adult foster care, or a Department of Children and Family Services, or DCFS foster home. If somebody lives in something like a skilled nursing facility or an intermediate care facility, which are usually funded by Medi-Cal, or an institution like a developmental center or an institution for dental disease, unless there is a plan for them to move into the community within 90 days, they are not eligible for self-determination services. I want to be clear that this is extraordinarily rare, and I would be absolutely shocked if that actually applied to anybody in this meeting tonight. But the reason for this rule is because the self-determination program is a waiver through the Center for Medicare and Medicaid Services federally, just like other waivers you may have heard of, like the ones that allow institutional deeming Medi-Cal, for example. The purpose of waivers like this is to keep people in what's known as the least restrictive environment. So with the most independence possible. And settings like an institution or a skilled nursing facility, those are already considered to be restrictive environments. So the services cannot avoid that. So therefore, they are not eligible. Self-determination also provides more flexibility in service delivery, but it's not a free-for-all. The laws and even North Bay Regional Center policies still apply. Self-determination participation and services are only allowed when the service will meet IPP goals. and when generic resources are not available. To be clear, generic resources are not about SOTUS. Generic resources are any type of service that is not funded by the regional center. And by law, these types of services have to be used before the regional center is allowed to fund any services. And that's in traditional services and self-determination. So in self-determination, just like in traditional services, in-home supportive services, or IHSS, will still be the primary payer for personal care. The school district will still have to provide educational services for children between the ages of 3 and 22. And typical parental responsibility will still apply for children under the age of 18. And what that means is that the Lanterman Act only allows the regional center to purchase services if the need for the service exceeds what a typically developing child would need. So in general, there are some things that parents just have to do when their kids are under 18. In addition, there are some other requirements for services, like different age requirements, that we will go over in more detail in future training. One of the beautiful and flexible things about self-determination in general is that people are no longer held to or required to use vendored providers, or those who have a contract with the regional center. Now, I want to be clear that you can use vendored providers as long as they meet some requirements we'll talk about at a different training, but you don't have to. I know that some of you may have vendored providers that you really like, really rely on, and don't want to lose, and you don't necessarily have to. But there is one exception to the rule about not having to use vendored providers. And that exception is that every participant must use a vendored or contracted financial management service provider, or as we tend to call it, FMS. And this provider will manage the money, pay providers, and make sure that tax and employment laws are followed, which is actually really good because California has the most intense employment laws in the country and quite possibly the world. And I know that I personally appreciate the help that I get with those. Participants and families do not have access to money directly, and the law does not allow for participants or family members to make purchases and then be reimbursed. Everything has to be paid directly through the Financial Management Service Agency. Finally, but still quite importantly, and before you do anything else, participants need to attend the mandatory orientation that explains the program in more detail than I am right now. Abraham did put into the chat the link for orientation sign up. You have nothing to lose by attending the orientation except possibly 2 hours of your life. There is no obligation to move forward with self-determination after orientation, but it is an opportunity to really learn more about the program. And that opportunity to learn is giving you a choice in and of itself, which is what self-determination is all about. And self-determination itself is a choice, and the participant or the legal guardian needs to actively make that choice to receive these services. I want to stress that self-determination doesn't have to be a forever choice, though. It's important to know that you can try self-determination. And if it doesn't work out, you can go back to traditional services. Now, you can't decide this week that you're going to be in self-determination and next week that you're going to be in traditional services and the week after that you're going to be in self-determination again, because there is a waiting period if you leave self-determination and return to traditional services before you'll be able to return to self-determination. And there may also be some requirements from the regional center about when it is possible to switch from self-determination to traditional services. And again, this isn't because they're trying to make anybody's life difficult. This is because honestly, on the back end, switching between self-determination and traditional services is a lot of work for the regional center. And they actually have a statutory by law responsibility to make sure to the best of their ability that services are not interrupted during those transitions. And that's going to take time and coordination to do. Next slide, please. I'm sure some of you already are like, okay, so this sounds like a lot of work. So why am I doing it? And the reason why is because of the opportunity. Through creative and person-centered services, self-determination presents an opportunity to reduce disparities in service delivery that are sometimes seen with different minority and ethnic groups. For example, there is a known nationwide shortage of Spanish-speaking nurses, and many home health agencies that have contracts with the regional center do not have Spanish-speaking nurses available, particularly because the rate that the regional center is allowed to pay them is not nearly as competitive as like a hospital would offer. This might prevent a client of the regional center from accessing authorized respite services if they require a nurse, particularly if they weren't comfortable with someone coming into their home who didn't speak their language. Now, in self-determination, the participant or family can decide how much they're going to pay their employees. So they could choose to recruit and hire a Spanish-speaking nurse directly and pay them competitively, which could then allow them to access the services. In addition, this could allow for other culturally and linguistically sensitive services that provide more flexibility and may meet each person's unique needs better. It can also help to reach people in more rural areas to ensure that they can receive some services they wouldn't otherwise be able to access, even if they might need them, like programming during the day. One of my favorite quotes, which it's a favorite quote and I made it up myself, so that's a little weird, but okay. One of my favorite quotes is, just because someone didn't receive a service doesn't mean they didn't need it. Some of you might feel like you are a hamster on a wheel with traditional services. You are looking for services that will meet your needs or that of your loved one, but they are nowhere to be found. You have changed vendors and the vendor has changed workers, and you keep trying, but nothing seems to work and everyone's frustrated. Self-determination lets you have more control, and it lets you make specific requirements, and it lets you take over some aspects of the services and receive the support the way you desire to, which may allow you to successfully access, utilize, and benefit from various authorized services in a way the traditional service delivery systems can't always. Self-determination also gives people the ability to access services that aren't available in the traditional service system. Now, one thing to keep in mind is that the regional center isn't necessarily going to add money to the participant's budget to cover some of these services. You may need to move things around from other parts of your budget. All services are also individualized, so not everyone is eligible for everything. But some participants might be able to access funding to get a service dog or a personal emergency response system, like a tracking system, because maybe they elope and need help to keep themselves safe. Or maybe they want massage therapy or acupuncture or Uber or Lyft to get them to and from work instead of access or the bus if it's unreliable, or any number of things. The list of services available in self-determination is 27 pages long, and we will be going over it in more detail in a future training, but it can be really exciting overall. Another critical opportunity presented by self-determination is the ability to better serve some self-advocates. There are people who, for lack of better words, are too high functioning to benefit from the vendored services available. Almost ironically, this subgroup tends to be underserved and its own disparity group. Self-determination can be the answer. In my roles, I have helped people access dating coaches, self-employment support, technology, college, and so much more. Before we go on to the next slide and some specific examples, I just want to give people a second in case anybody wants to put a question in the chat or unmute themselves. Okay. Next slide, please. So I'm sure a lot of this does sound great, but just like person-centered thinking, you're wondering how and if it actually works out. I am now going to share some real life, de identified success stories, all of which I do have permission to share with you today, and which I hope will show you how self determination can change lives and meet needs. The first person that I want to talk to you today about is a 13-year-old boy. His family was monolingual Spanish speaking, and he has a diagnosis of cerebral palsy. He doesn't use words to communicate, and he also has some other medical needs that meant he needed a nurse to do respite care for him in order to give his family a break. Despite authorizations in place for respite, he and his family were not actually receiving the service because his family was not comfortable with having someone care for him that they couldn't communicate with because the nurses available didn't speak Spanish. And this was especially critical because he couldn't tell his family if anything happened during using words. In addition, his person-centered plan, which we are going to talk more about in different trainings, helped find unmet needs and changes in circumstance, which we're also going to talk more about in other trainings. And these made him eligible for other services that he needed but wasn't receiving, like social skills training and floor time. When all was said and done, his family was able to find a Spanish-speaking respite worker who really met his needs and his family was comfortable with. And that gave his parents that desperately needed break and the time to spend with his brother one-on-one as well. The family was also able to use the funds to access swimming lessons, which helped him with some of the symptoms of cerebral palsy and ensured his safety around bodies of water. His family was thrilled, even in the time of COVID when we were doing this, and he was no longer part of the disparity in service delivery. Now, the second person I want to tell you about is a 13-year-old girl. She is considered twice exceptional, which means that while she does have autism and attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, or ADHD, and deficits associated with those diagnoses, she's also intellectually gifted. As you might imagine, quote unquote, traditional services didn't really meet her needs. She didn't need quote unquote social skills training in the traditional sense, but rather someone to encourage her to have a back and forth conversation with her about her goal to run for president. By the way, she has my vote. I'm pretty sure it's like 2036 that she's eligible. Self-determination also gave her the ability to attend camp as an out-of-home respite. And this was particularly helpful during COVID, when gymnastics camp, for example, gave her a socially distant and safe way to meet her autism-related sensory needs, which reduced her elopement and increased her safety, and also increased her social skills. She was also able to access specific sensory equipment not otherwise available through generic resources in order to assist her with attending the online classes and services that were so prevalent during COVID-19, and I guess right now, but especially during the early days of COVID. It was very hard for her to sit in front of Zoom for 6 hours a day or 8 hours a day. And so having sensory equipment like a special chair and a weighted blanket really helped keep her safe so that she didn't try to meet her sensory needs by running out the door and climbing a tree. And by the way, when I say climbing a tree, I don't mean climbing a tree like I would do to like the first branch. I mean like climbing a tree that would make firefighters jealous. My third example is a 34-year-old man who is diagnosed with autism. He has been part of the regional center since he was 2 years old, and he once told me that I was the first person who made him feel human, which was both one of the biggest honors I've ever received and something really hard to hear. Now, he had really done okay with traditional services. He was competitively employed, he received transportation, and he had a fitness program, but he wasn't satisfied. Person-centered planning, a solid independent facilitator, which is something that we'll talk about in another training, and self-determination have allowed him to link with a new employment coach. And he just got hired as a janitor at a group home. And that is the first step because he hopes to one day actually be a service coordinator. And he's also attending college. When he's going to work these days, instead of relying on the contracted transportation that often took long routes or access that often made him late, he uses Uber and he has more flexibility. Instead of the group fitness program that he went to with other people with disabilities, he now goes to the gym and makes me look bad so often because he goes to the gym like every night and sends me selfies and I'm like eating crumble cookies or something. But he has a one-on-one trainer and he has lost about 20 pounds already. He found that he needed independent living skills to help him be more self-sufficient, and he's learning how to cook, which will also help him with his goal of improving his health. And he identified that he wants more friends and romantic relationships, so he's also attending dating classes. And all of the things that I just mentioned about him were within his first year of self-determination. He only started his second year on September 1st. My final example is that of a young woman who's 23 years old. She has significant medical needs, and combining her generic Medi-Cal funded nursing services and her in-home supportive services with self-determination has allowed her to have greater coverage and provide her mother with a much needed break. One thing that's hard for people to realize and that self-determination can really help with is that there is no typical parental responsibility of a child who is an adult over the age of 18. Many parents provide significant support to their children in adulthood, but they're not required to. And the regional center can help step in more when the person is over age 18 to provide them the support that they need. But the flexibility of self-determination is also shown in her daily activities because she doesn't just need caretaking or someone who will watch her exist. When she is feeling good, even though she doesn't use words to communicate and she needs a wheelchair to ambulate, she loves to socialize and be out in the community. Her family has been able to find providers who can take her to interact at the local community college and be part of her community. And this she would probably otherwise require a sheltered, segregated adult day health center, which would only be with people who had disabilities or were elderly. Next slide, please. So I hope that by now, even if you're not excited, you are at least mildly curious and or willing to consider self-determination. Now, how do you do it? First and foremost, I want you to just think about it. Could you or your loved one benefit from the flexibility of self-determination? Even if you aren't interested or ready this year, will you consider next year and the year after? You might need time to adjust to the idea, but just because you aren't ready now doesn't mean you never will be. And self-determination isn't going anywhere. There are meetings and trainings that you can attend, a lot of which are via Zoom now, which is probably the best part of COVID. And you can learn more about the program and make an informed choice. Like I mentioned before, we encourage you to attend the bi-monthly local advisory committee meetings to be part of the community surrounding self-determination. And in fact, the committee needs more members. So we encourage you to apply to join the committee too, for that matter. In general, community is one of the greatest possibilities of the self-determination program. And COVID-19 has enhanced the online connectivity of so many people, disabled and otherwise. There are many online resources where participants and families can access more resources, learn more about the program, and meet people who are in similar situations to them, which is critical when thinking of the overall regional center populations that are often isolated. Abraham, I'm going to ask you to put all of that back in the chat again, just in case people missed it. But in general, there is a statewide Facebook page that you can refer to, which has over almost 3,000 members in it. There is another website, the California Self-Determination Network, where you can get help finding providers like independent facilitators, person-centered planners, and others. And then there's also information on the North Bay Regional Center and Department of Developmental Services websites regarding the self-determination program and updates. We have been told that North Bay is in the process of revamping their website and that some things aren't working quite the way they intended them to, but we are confident that they will get fixed soon. So with that said, that is all of the questions that are all of the information that I have to share tonight. So if anybody has any questions, now would be a great time to ask them. And if you don't have questions now, because I just threw a ton of information at you and your head is spinning, you might have more questions later, and that is okay. And in that case, you can feel free to reach out to us. Specifically, you can follow that coaching link that Abraham just put into the chat, and you will get connected to a one-on-one free coach through Education Spectrum to help you with self-determination. You can also feel free to contact us directly. My contact information and Kathy's contact information is on the screen. But you can also contact SVP@nbrc.net, and we're going to put all these in the chat to make it a little bit easier as well, with questions that may come up later or that may be more specific to your unique situation if you don't want to share it with the group. But otherwise, I'm going to give people a couple more minutes, and if we don't have any questions by about 6:25, I think we'll probably hop off for the night. And if you don't have any questions, you can feel free to log off. But we thank all of you for taking the time to be with us this evening and be part of our community. And we hope that you will consider self-determination for yourself or your loved one. Kathy, do you want to turn off the recording? Because sometimes with questions too, they can get personal.